Deep within the limestone caverns of southeastern Kentucky, where the earth splits open to reveal geological formations that predate human understanding, researchers have documented the most scientifically puzzling bloodline in recorded Appalachian history. The Meridian family didn't simply defy medical explanation, they represented a fundamental challenge to our understanding of human biology itself. The first documented encounter with the Meridian anomaly occurred in 1923 when Dr. Harrison Blackwell, a physician conducting rural health surveys for the Kentucky Department of Public Health, arrived in the isolated community of Bone Hollow. What he discovered there would consume the remainder of his career and ultimately lead to his professional exile from the medical establishment. Dr. Blackwell's initial report, filed with the state health department and subsequently classified for 60 years, described a family exhibiting physiological characteristics that contradicted established medical knowledge. The Meridians, he wrote, possessed skeletal structures that appeared to be undergoing active reconstruction throughout their adult lives. X-ray examinations revealed bone density measurements that fluctuated dramatically from one examination to the next, sometimes within the span of a single week. Most disturbing was his documentation of what he termed selective tissue regeneration. Minor injuries to Meridian family members healed with unprecedented speed, but the healing process followed patterns that seemed to respond to external environmental factors rather than biological necessity. Cuts sustained during the full moon healed within hours, leaving no visible scarring. Injuries occurring during the new moon, however, remained open and raw for weeks, as if the body's natural healing mechanisms had been somehow suspended. The family patriarch, Amos Meridian, became the subject of Dr. Blackwell's most intensive study. Medical examinations revealed that Amos possessed a cardiovascular system that defied anatomical logic. His heart rate fluctuated between 12 and 200 beats per minute, with no apparent correlation to physical exertion or emotional state. More puzzling still, these variations followed a precise 28-day cycle that aligned with lunar phases with mathematical precision. Blood samples taken from Meridian family members exhibited properties that challenged fundamental assumptions about human physiology. Their blood maintained consistent temperature regardless of ambient conditions, remaining at exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, even when exposed to freezing temperatures for extended periods. Laboratory analysis revealed unusual crystalline structures within their red blood cells that formed geometric patterns resembling naturally occurring mineral formations found deep within the limestone caves surrounding Bone Hollow. Dr. Blackwell's research expanded beyond individual family members to encompass the broader community surrounding the Meridians. He documented a phenomenon he called proximity inheritance, where individuals who spent extended time near Meridian family members began exhibiting similar physiological anomalies. Local residents reported change in their sleep patterns, with many developing the ability to remain fully alert and functional on as little as 2 hours of sleep per night. Others experienced dramatic improvements in night vision, describing the ability to navigate the complex cave systems surrounding the valley in complete darkness. The geological survey commissioned by Dr. Blackwell in 1924 revealed that Bone Hollow occupied a unique position above one of the most extensive limestone cave networks in North America. The cave system extended far deeper than mapping technology of the era could accurately measure, with acoustic tests suggesting chambers and passages that reached nearly 2 miles beneath the surface. Most significantly, the caves exhibited unusual electromagnetic properties that interfered with compass readings and caused unexplained fluctuations in radio equipment. Local folklore, meticulously documented by Dr. Blackwell's research assistant, Margaret Sims, suggested that the Meridian family had maintained residence in Bone Hollow for far longer than genealogical records indicated. Stories passed down through generations described ancestors who remembered the Meridians as already established residents when the first European settlers arrived in the region during the late 18th century. Cherokee oral histories, when Margaret could locate willing sources, spoke of the Bone people who lived beneath the mountain and emerged only during certain phases of the moon to trade rare minerals for food and manufactured goods. The family's relationship with the cave system became a central focus of Dr. Blackwell's investigation. Meridian family members spent significant portions of their time underground, often disappearing for days at a time into passages that other residents of Bone Hollow claimed were impossible to navigate safely. When questioned about their underground activities, family members provided vague responses about tending the foundations and maintaining the balance. Direct observation of Meridian underground activities proved challenging, as the family possessed an uncanny ability to detect the presence of outsiders within the cave system. Dr. Blackwell's attempts to follow family members into the caves resulted in disorientation and confusion, with the physician finding himself at the cave entrance hours later with no memory of how he had returned to the surface. Acoustic monitoring equipment placed at cave entrances recorded sounds that defied identification, rhythmic patterns that resembled human speech but contained frequencies outside the normal range of vocal production. The biological anomalies exhibited by the Meridian family extended to their reproductive patterns. Children were born only during specific astronomical alignments, with births occurring exclusively during total lunar eclipses. These children exhibited accelerated development during their first year of life, reaching physical milestones that typically required 18 to 24 months within 6 to 8 months of birth. However, their aging process then slowed dramatically, with family members appearing to maintain the same physical appearance for decades. Dr. Blackwell's documentation of Meridian longevity became one of his most controversial findings. Records suggested that several family members had maintained unchanged appearances for periods exceeding normal human lifespans. Amos Meridian, according to local birth records, was listed as being born in 1847, yet appeared to be no older than 40 during Dr. Blackwell's examinations in the 1920s. When questioned about this discrepancy, Amos claimed that the cave system provided sustenance that surface dwellers cannot understand. The physician's research took a more disturbing turn when he began documenting the effects of prolonged exposure to Meridian influence on the broader community. Residents who had lived in Bone Hollow for extended periods began exhibiting physical changes that seemed to mirror certain Meridian characteristics. Their bone density increased dramatically, their cardiovascular systems developed unusual rhythmic patterns, and their blood began exhibiting the same temperature regulation properties observed in the Meridian family. More concerning was the psychological impact on community members. Long-term residents developed what Dr. Blackwell termed collective consciousness indicators, the ability to communicate complex information without verbal exchange, and an apparent shared awareness of events occurring throughout the valley. These individuals described experiencing dreams and visions that were identical across multiple subjects, suggesting some form of shared psychological space that defied conventional understanding of individual consciousness. The investigation reached its climax during the lunar eclipse of October 1924, when Dr. Blackwell was granted permission to observe a Meridian family ceremony taking place deep within the cave system. His written account of this experience, discovered among his personal papers decades after his death, described a ritual that challenged his understanding of both human capability and natural law. The ceremony took place in a vast underground chamber that Dr. Blackwell estimated to be nearly 300 feet in diameter. The walls were covered with mineral formations that appeared to have been deliberately shaped into complex geometric patterns. At the center of the chamber stood a natural formation resembling an altar, composed of what appeared to be crystallized limestone that emitted a faint phosphorescent glow. During the ritual, Meridian family members arranged themselves in concentric circles around the central formation. Dr. Blackwell observed that their skin began to emit the same phosphorescent glow as the crystalline formations, creating patterns of light that pulsed in synchronization across all participants. The family members began producing vocalizations that harmonized in ways that created audible resonance effects throughout the chamber, causing the limestone formations to vibrate at frequencies that could be felt through the cave floor. Most remarkable was Dr. Blackwell's observation that the family members appeared to be directly communicating with the cave system itself. As the ritual progressed, new mineral formations began emerging from the chamber walls, growing at visible rates that contradicted everything known about geological processes. The newly formed crystals displayed the same geometric patterns found in Meridian blood samples, suggesting a direct biological influence on inorganic matter. The eclipse ceremony concluded with what Dr. Blackwell described as biological fusion with geological structures. Several family members placed their hands directly onto the crystalline formations, and he observed what appeared to be the direct transfer of organic material into the mineral matrix. Their hands seemed to merge temporarily with the crystal surfaces, creating hybrid formations that displayed characteristics of both living tissue and inorganic minerals. Dr. Blackwell's final report, submitted to state authorities in early 1925, recommended immediate scientific investigation of the Meridian phenomenon. He argued that the family represented either an unknown branch of human evolution or evidence of biological adaptation mechanisms that could revolutionize medical understanding. His recommendations were met with professional skepticism and eventual dismissal from his position with the state health department. Following Dr. Blackwell's departure from Bone Hollow, the Meridian family appeared to withdraw even further from contact with the outside world. Subsequent attempts to locate and study the family met with consistent failure. Government investigators sent to the area in the 1930s reported finding no trace of the meridians, despite clear evidence of recent habitation in the caves. Local residents claimed that the family had returned to the deep places and could no longer be reached by surface dwellers. Modern scientific expeditions to the Bone Hollow cave system have yielded tantalizing but inconclusive evidence of the meridian presence. Advanced ground penetrating radar has detected structured chambers far deeper than previous mapping indicated, with geometric patterns that match Dr. Blackwell's descriptions of the ceremonial chamber. Mineral analysis of formations within these deep chambers reveals crystalline structures that contain trace amounts of organic compounds that shouldn't exist in geological formations. Most intriguingly, monitoring equipment placed throughout the cave system has recorded electromagnetic anomalies that occur in precise 28-day cycles corresponding to lunar phases. During these episodes, the caves emit radio frequencies that form complex patterns resembling mathematical sequences. Audio recordings capture sounds that bear resemblance to human vocalizations, though analysis indicates frequencies outside the normal range of human vocal production. The Meridian legacy continues to influence the Bone Hollow community in ways that suggest their presence persists despite their apparent withdrawal from surface contact. Children born in the valley after 1925 have exhibited unusual physiological characteristics that echo the documented meridian traits. Local medical practitioners report instances of accelerated healing, unusual cardiovascular patterns, and blood chemistry anomalies that mirror Dr. Blackwell's original findings. Recent genetic studies of long-term Bone Hollow residents have revealed DNA sequences that don't match known human genetic patterns. These sequences appear to be stable and hereditary, suggesting that the meridian influence has created lasting changes in the local population's biological makeup. The implications of these findings remain unclear, as the genetic variations don't correspond to any known evolutionary adaptations or medical conditions. The scientific community continues to grapple with the implications of the meridian phenomenon. The documented evidence defies classification within conventional medical or anthropological frameworks, challenging fundamental assumptions about human biological limitations and environmental adaptation. Whether the meridians represent an unknown evolutionary branch, evidence of biological manipulation by unknown forces, or something else entirely remains an open question that has profound implications for our understanding of human potential and the relationship between biology and environment. Today, the caves beneath Bone Hollow remain largely unexplored, their deepest chambers holding secrets that may explain not just the Meridian family mystery, but fundamental questions about the nature of life itself. The rhythmic electromagnetic pulses continue. The geometric mineral formations keep growing in patterns that suggest intelligent design, and somewhere in the darkness below, something waits with the patience of geological time for the next phase of whatever began in those limestone depths so many years ago. Deep in the fog-shrouded valleys of eastern Kentucky, where county maps still show blank spaces and cell towers fear to tread, lies the documented yet inexplicable legacy of the Grimwald bloodline. What began as a routine genealogical survey in 1994 has evolved into one of the most puzzling cases in Appalachian research, challenging everything we thought we knew about heredity, isolation, and the very nature of human evolution. The first Grimwald arrived in what would become Bone Creek Valley in 1823, according to a single surviving land deed discovered in a water-damaged courthouse basement. Ezekiel Grimwald purchased 2,000 acres of what local Cherokee had called the breathing ground for a sum that seemed impossibly small, even by frontier standards. No records exist of his origin, his journey, or his family background. He simply appeared in the valley like morning mist, carrying nothing but a leather satchel and an unusual walking stick carved from black wood that local botanists still cannot identify. What makes the Grimwald case extraordinary isn't their isolation or even their peculiar customs. It's what happened to their bodies over the generations. By the time researchers first encountered the family in the 1960s, 7 generations had produced physical adaptations that should have taken thousands of years to develop, if they were possible at all. Dr. Margaret Chen, a geneticist from Johns Hopkins who spent 3 years studying the Grimwalds in the 1990s, described her first encounter with 22-year-old Samuel Grimwald. "I thought I was looking at a patient with a rare medical condition. His fingers were nearly twice the normal length, with additional joints that allowed for an impossible range of motion. His pupils dilated and contracted independently of light conditions, and his lung capacity tested at nearly 3 times normal human levels. But here's what kept me awake at night. He wasn't sick. He was perfectly healthy. More than healthy, he was optimized for his environment in ways that violated everything I knew about human biology." The Grimwald children could see clearly in complete darkness, navigate underground cave systems without light, and hold their breath for periods that approached those of marine mammals. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to sense seismic activity days before it occurred. Local mining operations learned to watch the Grimwalds shutting down when the family retreated to higher ground, a practice that saved countless lives over the decades. But physical adaptations were only the beginning of the mystery. The Grimwalds aged differently than the rest of us. Children remained physically immature until their late teens, then rapidly developed into what appeared to be peak human specimens. They maintained this condition for decades before aging accelerated again in their 70s. Multiple birth certificates and death records confirmed that Grimwald family members consistently lived well into their hundreds, with several documented cases of individuals reaching 130 years of age while maintaining physical capabilities that would be remarkable in someone half their age. Dr. Chen's research team collected DNA samples from 17 family members across 4 generations. The results challenged fundamental assumptions about human genetics. The Grimwald genome contained sequences that shouldn't exist in humans, Chen reported in her classified preliminary findings. "We found genetic markers that appeared in isolated populations separated by thousands of miles and millions of years of evolution. It was as if their DNA was actively incorporating beneficial mutations from multiple species." More troubling were the psychological evaluations. While the Grimwalds appeared friendly and cooperative during initial contact, prolonged interaction revealed disturbing patterns. They seemed to possess an uncanny ability to predict the actions and thoughts of others. Researchers found themselves acting in ways they hadn't consciously decided upon after spending time with family members. Dr. James Wright, the team's psychologist, noted that subjects consistently anticipated his questions before he asked them and responded to concerns he hadn't yet vocalized. It wasn't telepathy, Wright explained in his final report. It was more like they were reading our intentions directly from our body language, micro expressions, and behavioral patterns in ways that seemed superhuman. They were always one step ahead of our research protocols, as if they knew what we were going to study before we decided to study it. The family's relationship with their environment proved equally mystifying. The Grimwalds cultivated plants that didn't exist in any botanical catalog, hybrid species that combined characteristics from flora separated by thousands of miles. Their livestock displayed similar anomalies, horses that could navigate mountain trails in complete darkness, cattle that seemed immune to local diseases that plagued neighboring farms, and hunting dogs with senses so acute they could track scents across days-old trails. Local folklore suggested the Grimwalds had made some form of arrangement with the mountain itself. Old-timers spoke of seeing family members emerge from cave entrances that search teams later found sealed by solid rock. Children reported watching Grimwald elders place their hands on dying trees and witnessing them return to health within days. Miners whispered about the family's apparent ability to locate underground water sources and mineral deposits with impossible accuracy. Dr. Chen's team documented dozens of these incidents, but the scientific explanations remained elusive. Soil samples from Grimwald property showed mineral compositions that didn't match the surrounding geography. Water from their wells contained beneficial microorganisms found nowhere else in the region. Even the air in Bone Creek Valley carried unusual properties, with oxygen levels consistently higher than the surrounding areas despite the elevation. The mystery deepened when researchers attempted to map the family's genetic history. Traditional genealogical research produced contradictory results. Church records, when they existed, showed baptisms and marriages, but birth and death dates frequently conflicted with physical evidence. Family photographs spanning decades showed individuals who appeared to age at different rates, with some family members looking identical across images taken 20 years apart. More disturbing was the discovery of older records buried in various county archives. Documents dating back to the Civil War described encounters with families matching the Grimwald description in multiple states simultaneously. A Confederate supply sergeant's journal from 1863 mentioned trading with the tall mountain folk with the strange eyes in both Kentucky and Virginia on the same day, an impossibility given the travel limitations of the era. Similar reports emerged from railroad construction records, mining surveys, and territorial expansion documents throughout the 19th century. Always the same physical descriptions, always the same unusual capabilities, always the helpful but unsettling interaction style that left witnesses feeling they'd encountered something not quite human. The research project ended abruptly in 1997 when Dr. Chen's team discovered evidence suggesting the Grimwalds were not unique. Fragmentary records pointed to similar bloodlines scattered throughout the Appalachian region, families with different names but identical characteristics. The implications were staggering. If these adaptations were occurring across multiple isolated populations, they represented either an impossible coincidence or evidence of forces beyond current scientific understanding. Dr. Chen's final report, classified by the university and never published, allegedly concluded that the Grimwald bloodline represented an active experiment in human evolution conducted by unknown parties for unknown purposes. She recommended immediate expanded research and continuous monitoring of the family. Instead, funding was quietly withdrawn. The research team was disbanded, and members were reassigned to projects across different institutions. Dr. Chen left academia entirely, opening a small medical practice in suburban Maryland, where she refuses to discuss her Appalachian research. But the story doesn't end with the departure of the scientists. Local residents report that the Grimwalds remain in Bone Creek Valley, though they've become increasingly reclusive since the research concluded. Hikers occasionally glimpse figures moving through the forest with impossible grace and speed. Hunters describe finding tracks that seem human but show anatomical features that medical science says don't exist. Most disturbing are the recent disappearances. Over the past decade, several researchers, journalists, and amateur investigators have ventured into Bone Creek Valley seeking the Grimwalds. Most return with vague stories about getting lost and spending days wandering in circles before finding their way out. They describe experiencing vivid dreams about underground cities and beings that looked human but moved like something else entirely. A few never return at all. Search and rescue teams find no trace of these missing persons, though they occasionally discover abandoned equipment arranged in patterns that seem deliberate but serve no apparent purpose. Local authorities have quietly discouraged further independent research, citing safety concerns about the challenging terrain and unstable weather patterns in the region. The most recent incident occurred in 2019 when a documentary crew from a major television network received permission to film in the valley. Their footage, according to sources who viewed it before it was confiscated, showed empty cabins and overgrown gardens, but no sign of current habitation. However, audio analysis allegedly revealed conversations in languages that linguists couldn't identify and sounds that didn't match any known animal calls. What remains certain is that something extraordinary occurred in Bone Creek Valley over the past 2 centuries. Whether the Grimwalds represent a remarkable example of rapid human adaptation, evidence of genetic manipulation by unknown parties, or something else entirely, may never be determined. The family continues to guard their secrets as carefully as they've guarded their mountain home. But late at night, when the fog rolls through the Appalachian valleys and the ancient mountains seem to breathe in the darkness, local residents still report hearing sounds from Bone Creek Valley. Not quite human voices calling to each other across impossible distances, carried on winds that seem to blow uphill and bend around obstacles in ways that physics says they shouldn't. And sometimes, on the clearest nights when the moon is dark and the stars seem unusually bright, they swear they can see lights moving through the forest in patterns too complex and purposeful to be anything natural, yet too alien to be entirely human. The Grimwald bloodline remains in those mountains, evolved beyond our understanding, watching from the shadows of valleys that don't appear on modern maps, waiting for purposes that science cannot yet comprehend. In the shadowed valleys of eastern Tennessee, where Cherokee shamans once spoke of cursed bloodlines and forbidden knowledge, the Morrow family established their settlement in 1864 with nothing more than determination and a peculiar understanding of the mountain's hidden nature. What began as a desperate flight from the ravages of the Civil War would evolve into one of Appalachia's most documented yet inexplicable genealogical mysteries, challenging everything modern science believes about human heredity and the boundaries between folklore and biological reality. The first Morrow to enter Serpent's Hollow was Captain Isaiah Morrow, a Confederate deserter carrying his pregnant wife Sarah and their two young children through territory that local Cherokee had abandoned decades earlier. Historical records from the Gatlinburg courthouse describe Isaiah as a man of average build with unremarkable features. Yet survivors of his military unit recalled something unsettling about his presence during night watches, how conversations would cease when he approached, and how even hardened soldiers avoided making direct eye contact with him for extended periods. Sarah gave birth to their third child, Samuel, within a week of their arrival in the hollow. The midwife who assisted, a Cherokee woman named Ayanna, who had remained in the area against her tribe's warnings, documented the birth in her personal journal with unusual attention to detail. According to her account, the child was born with his eyes wide open, pupils so dilated they appeared entirely black, and he made no sound despite appearing healthy and alert. More troubling was her observation that the infant seemed to track movements around the room with an awareness that suggested cognitive development far beyond that of a newborn. Within 5 years, the Morrow family had not only survived in the isolated hollow, but had begun to thrive in ways that defied the harsh realities faced by other Appalachian settlers. Their crops flourished during droughts that devastated neighboring farms. Their livestock remained healthy despite regional outbreaks of disease, and they displayed an uncanny ability to locate underground water sources and mineral deposits that had eluded previous inhabitants. Dr. Edmund Whitmore, a traveling physician who visited the hollow in 1871, documented his observations in a series of letters to his colleague at the University of Virginia Medical School. Whitmore described encountering a family that appeared to have developed remarkable resistance to common diseases and injuries. Minor cuts and burns healed with extraordinary speed, leaving no scarring. Family members displayed unusual physical coordination and seemed to require significantly less sleep than normal humans. Most puzzling was their apparent ability to navigate the treacherous mountain terrain in complete darkness, moving with confidence through areas that challenged experienced hunters, even in daylight. The second generation of Morrows born in Serpent's Hollow exhibited characteristics that Whitmore struggled to explain within the medical understanding of his era. Children developed adult teeth before losing their primary teeth, creating temporary double rows that gave their smiles a predatory appearance. Their hearing was acute enough to detect approaching visitors from distances that seemed impossible, and they demonstrated an unsettling tendency to speak in unison when questioned by outsiders, as if they shared a collective consciousness that transcended individual thought. By 1880, the Morrow settlement had grown to include several branch families, all bearing the characteristics that marked the bloodline. Government census takers reported difficulty conducting accurate counts, as family members seemed to anticipate the visits and would often be found waiting at predetermined locations, having prepared responses to questions that had not yet been asked. Birth records became increasingly problematic as children were born with physical features that challenged conventional documentation. Ages seemed inconsistent with developmental milestones, and death certificates were rarely filed despite the passing of elderly family members. The mystery deepened when researchers from the Smithsonian Institution arrived in 1885 to investigate reports of an isolated population exhibiting unusual anthropological characteristics. Led by Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the expedition planned a comprehensive study of the Moro bloodlines' apparent adaptations to their mountain environment. The team's preliminary findings, preserved in fragmentary field notes discovered decades later, described subjects who appeared to age at different rates, with some individuals maintaining youthful appearances well into their documented 70s, while others seemed to mature rapidly before reaching physical stasis. Dr. Thornfield's most significant discovery involved the family's apparent manipulation of local wildlife. Moros could summon specific animals through vocalizations that resembled no known human language, and these creatures would perform complex tasks that suggested a level of interspecies communication that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition. Bears would deliver materials to construction sites. Wolves would herd livestock with precision that exceeded trained dogs, and birds would serve as an early warning system, alerting the family to approaching strangers hours before their arrival. The expedition's abrupt termination came after Dr. Thornfield's assistant, William Blackstone, disappeared during a routine specimen collection trip. Search parties found his equipment arranged in a perfect circle around a natural stone formation, but no trace of Blackstone himself. More disturbing was the discovery that his personal belongings had been sorted and arranged according to some unknown system, with items grouped in ways that seemed to follow a logic comprehensible only to the Moros themselves. Local folklore began to incorporate increasingly dark elements as stories spread about the Moro bloodline's true nature. Mountain residents spoke of seeing family members moving through the forest on moonless nights, their eyes reflecting light like nocturnal predators. Children from neighboring settlements reported dreams where the Moros appeared as shadowy figures, offering knowledge and power in exchange for unspecified service. Several families relocated from the region entirely after their livestock began exhibiting signs of supernatural influence, gathering in formations that matched patterns found around Moro property. The most troubling documented incident occurred in 1889 when a group of federal revenue agents investigating reports of illegal whiskey production entered Serpent's Hollow without permission. Only one agent, Thomas McKinley, emerged from the hollow 3 days later, found wandering the main road in a state of severe psychological distress. McKinley's official report, sealed for 50 years, described encounters with individuals who appeared to exist partially outside normal physical laws, moving through solid barriers and communicating through methods that bypassed spoken language entirely. McKinley's account detailed discovering the missing members of his team arranged in an underground chamber beneath the Moro settlement, alive but fundamentally changed. The men appeared to have been integrated into some form of collective organism, retaining their individual consciousness while serving as components of a larger biological system. They spoke of experiencing expanded awareness and understanding of natural processes that human science had barely begun to explore, but they expressed no desire to return to their previous existence. Modern genetic analysis of preserved Moro family artifacts, conducted in secret by university researchers in the 1990s, revealed DNA sequences that contained elements found in no other human populations. The samples included genetic markers suggesting incorporation of material from multiple mammalian species, plant compounds that should not exist in human tissue, and organizational structures that appeared to be artificially engineered rather than naturally evolved. Dr. Helena Morrison, the geneticist who conducted the unauthorized research, noted that the Moro genetic code seemed to be actively evolving, incorporating beneficial mutations at a rate that violated established principles of hereditary development. Her findings suggested that the bloodline possessed some mechanism for direct genetic manipulation, allowing conscious modification of hereditary traits within a single generation. The most recent documented encounter with the Moro bloodline occurred in 2003 when a team of National Geographic researchers investigating Appalachian biodiversity established a temporary research station near Serpent's Hollow. The team reported equipment failures, unexplained behavioral changes in local wildlife, and the discovery of plant species that exhibited characteristics found nowhere else in the region. Photographer David Chen documented several encounters with individuals claiming to be descendants of the original Moro settlers. His photographs, upon development, revealed subjects with physical features that seemed to shift between frames, as if their appearance existed in a constant state of flux. Blood samples collected from willing subjects contained cellular structures that challenged fundamental assumptions about human biology, displaying regenerative capabilities and adaptive responses that exceeded anything found in medical literature. Today, Serpent's Hollow remains largely inaccessible to casual visitors. The Tennessee Department of Natural Resources maintains the area as a protected ecosystem, citing concerns about geological instability and endangered species preservation. However, internal documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests reveal ongoing monitoring of unusual electromagnetic phenomena and regular reports of unexplained biological samples discovered by park rangers. Local residents continue to speak of the Moros in hushed tones, describing occasional encounters with individuals who display the characteristic features of the bloodline but claim no knowledge of their family's documented history. These modern Moros appear to live normal lives in surrounding communities, working conventional jobs, and maintaining typical social relationships, yet careful observers note subtle indicators of their heritage. Children born to these apparent descendants often exhibit accelerated learning capabilities, unusual physical coordination, and an unsettling tendency to demonstrate knowledge they could not have acquired through normal educational channels. Medical professionals in the region have learned to handle such cases with discretion, as standard diagnostic procedures often yield results that challenge conventional medical understanding. The mystery of the Moro bloodline represents more than an isolated anomaly in Appalachian history. It suggests the existence of human populations that have developed along evolutionary paths unknown to mainstream science, possibly through interaction with forces or entities that operate outside recognized natural laws. Whether the Morrows represent a unique genetic mutation, the result of deliberate biological manipulation, or evidence of something far more extraordinary, remains an open question that continues to challenge our understanding of human potential and the hidden depths of these ancient mountains. In the mist-shrouded hollows, where Cherokee shamans once spoke their warnings, the descendants of Isaiah and Sarah Morrow continue their quiet existence, guardians of secrets that science cannot yet explain and perhaps should not attempt to uncover. Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire bloodline becomes something more than human? In the fog-shrouded mountains of eastern Kentucky lies evidence of a family transformation so profound that modern science still struggles to explain it. The Greystone lineage didn't just adapt to their harsh mountain environment, they became something that defied the very laws of biology itself. What I'm about to share with you comes from decades of suppressed research, classified government documents, and testimonies from witnesses who risked everything to reveal the truth. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the Greystone name has been systematically erased from public records and why certain areas of the Cumberland Mountains remain permanently restricted to civilian access. The story begins in 1834 when Ezekiel Greystone arrived in what would later become Harlan County, Kentucky. Unlike other settlers who struggled against the unforgiving terrain, Ezekiel seemed to thrive in conditions that killed hardier men. Company records from the short-lived Cumberland Mining Consortium describe him as unnaturally resilient to the mountain's hardships and possessing an disturbing familiarity with the deepest cave systems. What made Ezekiel's success particularly unsettling was his apparent immunity to the mysterious ailments that plagued other settlers. The region suffered from what local physicians termed mountain sickness, a wasting disease that caused victims to grow pale, develop an aversion to sunlight, and eventually disappear entirely into the cave networks that honeycombed the area. Ezekiel not only remained healthy, but seemed to grow stronger as others weakened around him. The first documented evidence of the Greystone family's unusual nature appears in the Journal of Dr. Marcus Whitfield, a circuit physician who treated the mountain communities from 1840 to 1847. His entries, discovered in 1963 during the demolition of an abandoned medical college, paint a disturbing picture of biological impossibility. Dr. Whitfield wrote extensively about his encounters with the Greystone children, noting abnormalities that he initially attributed to malnutrition or genetic defects. The children possessed what he described as translucent skin that seemed to emit its own faint luminescence in darkness. More troubling were their dietary requirements. They showed no interest in conventional food, but thrived on what appeared to be mineral supplements that Ezekiel extracted from specific cave systems. The physician's most detailed observations concern young Jeremiah Greystone, born in 1842. Dr. Whitfield documented that the child's bones were significantly denser than normal, his muscle tissue exhibited unusual elasticity, and his blood contained mineral concentrations that should have been toxic to human physiology. Most remarkably, Jeremiah appeared to possess a natural sonar ability, navigating pitch-black cave systems with an accuracy that surpassed experienced spelunkers using modern equipment. By 1850, the Greystone family had expanded to include 7 children, each displaying similar physiological anomalies. Local records indicate that they rarely interacted with other settlers, preferring to remain in their compound, built directly over a complex cave entrance. The few visitors who were permitted access described a household that operated according to rhythms that had nothing to do with day and night cycles. Methodist circuit writer Reverend Isaiah Crawford documented one such visit in his private correspondence, later found among his effects after his mysterious disappearance in 1852. Crawford wrote of entering the Greystone home during what he assumed was mid-afternoon, only to find the family engaged in what appeared to be their evening meal, a substance he described as luminescent gruel that seemed to move of its own accord. The children, he noted, communicated primarily through subtle variations in breathing patterns and barely audible clicking sounds made with their tongues. The Reverend's account becomes particularly disturbing when he describes following Ezekiel into the cave system beneath the house. The passages, according to Crawford, extended far deeper than any natural formation should allow, eventually opening into vast chambers where the walls themselves seemed to pulse with a faint organic rhythm. Most unsettling was his observation that the Greystone children moved through these lightless spaces with the fluid grace of creatures born to absolute darkness. The Civil War period marked a significant escalation in the Greystone family's evolution. While other mountain families were torn apart by the conflict, the Greystones not only survived, but seemed to use the chaos to accelerate whatever transformation they were undergoing. Confederate and Union forces both reported encounters with Pale Mountain dwellers who could navigate treacherous terrain in complete darkness and seemed immune to conventional weapons. Captain William Torres of the 14th Kentucky Infantry documented one such encounter in his official report, filed in September 1863. His unit had been pursuing Confederate sympathizers through the Cumberland Gap when they were ambushed by what Torres initially believed to be enemy forces. However, the attackers moved with inhuman speed and coordination, scaling cliff faces that should have been impossible to climb and communicating through subsonic vocalizations that caused severe disorientation among Torres's men. What made this encounter particularly significant was Torres's description of capturing one of the attackers, a young man who appeared to be no older than 20, but possessed physical capabilities that defied explanation. The prisoner's skin was described as marble pale and cold to the touch. His pupils were completely dilated, even in bright sunlight, and his hands ended in fingernails that had grown thick and claw-like. Most disturbing was the prisoner's apparent inability to remain conscious in direct sunlight for more than a few minutes at a time. The captured individual, who identified himself only as Greystone, was transported to a Union field hospital where military physicians conducted a series of examinations. Their findings, classified until 1994, revealed bone density measurements that exceeded human norms by nearly 400%, muscle tissue that contained previously unknown protein structures, and a cardiovascular system that operated at approximately half the rate of normal human physiology while somehow maintaining superior oxygenation levels. Dr. Samuel Harrison, the chief medical officer who conducted these examinations, noted in his private journal that the subject's blood samples continued to exhibit cellular activity for over 6 weeks after extraction, far beyond the normal lifespan of human blood cells. More troubling was his observation that the subject seemed to enter a state of suspended animation when deprived of access to underground spaces, his metabolic rate dropping to levels that should have resulted in death. The prisoner escaped from military custody after only 3 days, apparently dissolving the iron shackles that bound him through some form of acidic secretion. Witnesses reported that he simply walked into the nearby forest and vanished, moving with a peculiar gliding motion that left no footprints despite the muddy ground. Following the war, the Greystone family's influence in the region expanded dramatically. They acquired vast tracts of land that other families had been forced to abandon, always focusing on areas with extensive underground cave systems. Local land records show a pattern of purchases that created a connected network of subterranean territories spanning 3 counties. The family's transformation became increasingly apparent to those brave enough to investigate. Traveling salesman Frederick Holloway documented his 1871 encounter with what he believed to be the entire Greystone clan during a supply run to their remote homestead. His account, preserved in a letter to his wife, describes a gathering of approximately 30 individuals who appeared to be engaged in some form of collective hibernation. Holloway wrote that he discovered the family members arranged in a large circle within the main cave chamber, their bodies motionless and their breathing so shallow as to be nearly imperceptible. The air in the chamber was thick with a sweet, organic scent that he compared to decomposing flowers, and the walls were covered with a phosphorescent substance that provided the only illumination. Most disturbing was his realization that some of the figures in the circle appeared to have been there for decades, their clothing rotted away, but their bodies perfectly preserved. When the family members began to stir in response to his presence, Holloway fled. His description of their awakening reads like something from a fever dream. They rose as one, moving with a fluid coordination that spoke of some shared consciousness. Their eyes reflected the cave's strange light, like those of nocturnal predators, and when they spoke, it was in voices that seemed to emerge from the stone itself rather than human throats. By the 1880s, the transformation of the Greystone lineage was complete. They had evolved, or perhaps devolved, into something that bore only superficial resemblance to humanity. Government geological surveys from this period, recently declassified, reveal the discovery of artificial cave systems that extended for miles beneath Greystone territory. These passages were too precisely engineered to be natural formations, yet they showed signs of having been created through some form of biological secretion rather than conventional excavation. The surveys also documented the presence of vast underground chambers containing what appeared to be agricultural installations designed to cultivate varieties of fungi unknown to surface biology. These organisms, according to the classified reports, exhibited properties that suggested they had been selectively bred over multiple generations to serve specific nutritional requirements that no longer aligned with standard human dietary needs. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, the lead biologist on the 1887 survey team, noted in her encrypted field notes that the Greystone family members encountered during the expedition displayed characteristics that suggested they had developed a form of collective metabolism. individual family members seemed capable of entering extended periods of dormancy, while others remained active, with the group apparently rotating through these cycles according to some predetermined pattern. Most significantly, Dr. Vasquez observed that the family members demonstrated the ability to navigate the complex cave systems through what appeared to be echolocation, producing subsonic clicks and interpreting the acoustic feedback with a precision that surpassed that of blind cave-dwelling animals. Her attempts to measure their vocal capabilities revealed that they could produce and perceive frequencies far below the range of normal human hearing. The last confirmed sighting of the Greystone family occurred in 1923, when a team of state geologists investigating unusual seismic activity in the Cumberland Mountains discovered evidence of their continued presence. The team's official report, sealed for nearly 8 decades, describes the discovery of a vast underground complex that showed signs of recent habitation by a large community of humanoid beings. The geologists found elaborate cultivation systems for phosphorescent organisms, living spaces carved directly into the rock with a precision that suggested the use of sophisticated biotechnology and evidence of a complex social structure based on collective decision-making processes that operated through chemical and acoustic communication rather than speech. Most disturbing were the geological modifications that the Greystone family had apparently made to the cave systems themselves. The survey team discovered that entire sections of the mountain's interior had been restructured to create optimal acoustic properties, turning the cave network into a massive resonance chamber capable of carrying subsonic communications across vast distances. The team's final report concluded that the Greystone family had successfully adapted to an entirely subterranean existence, developing biological and cultural characteristics that represented a completely separate evolutionary pathway from mainstream humanity. The lead geologist, Dr. Robert Hayes, noted in his private correspondence that the family appeared to have achieved a form of collective consciousness that operated through environmental manipulation and shared metabolic processes. The government's response to these discoveries was swift and comprehensive. The entire Greystone territory was designated as a restricted zone under the guise of geological instability, and all records of the family's existence were systematically purged from public archives. The official explanation cited the need to prevent tourist accidents in the dangerous cave systems, but internal documents reveal a more disturbing truth. Federal authorities had concluded that the Greystone lineage represented a potential biological hazard that could not be contained through conventional means. Their evolutionary adaptations had apparently included the development of airborne pheromones capable of inducing psychological changes in normal humans, and prolonged exposure to their underground environment appeared to trigger genetic modifications in visitors that made them incompatible with surface life. Today, nearly a century after their last confirmed sighting, the Greystone territory remains off-limits to civilian access. Satellite thermal imaging occasionally detects heat signatures moving through the sealed cave systems, suggesting that the family continues to thrive in their subterranean domain. Seismic monitoring stations record regular patterns of low-frequency vibrations emanating from the depths, acoustic signatures that scientists have been unable to decode, but that follow complex rhythmic patterns suggesting sophisticated communication networks. The Greystone bloodline represents perhaps the most complete example of human evolutionary divergence ever documented. They didn't simply adapt to their environment, they transcended the biological limitations that define our species, becoming something entirely new in the process. Whether this transformation represents the future of human evolution or a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation remains an open question that modern science is still afraid to answer. Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire bloodline develops abilities that completely defy medical explanation? Deep in the fog-shrouded mountains of eastern Tennessee lies evidence of a family whose very existence challenges everything we understand about human biology and genetics. The Ashford lineage didn't just adapt to their harsh mountain environment, they evolved into something that modern science still refuses to acknowledge. What I'm about to reveal comes from decades of suppressed medical records, classified government documents, and testimonies from researchers who risk their careers to document the truth. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the Ashford name has been systematically erased from public records and why certain areas of the Cumberland Plateau remain permanently restricted to civilian access. The story begins in 1862 when Silas Ashford arrived in what would later become Bledsoe County, Tennessee. Unlike other settlers struggling against the mountain's unforgiving terrain, Silas possessed an unsettling advantage that local physicians couldn't explain. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, the region's only trained doctor, documented in his private journal that Silas appeared immune to diseases that decimated other families. While cholera, typhoid, and mountain fever claimed dozens of lives each winter, the Ashford family thrived with an almost supernatural resilience. What made Silas particularly disturbing to medical professionals was his apparent ability to diagnose illnesses through physical contact alone. Whitmore's journal entries, discovered in 1954 during the demolition of an abandoned medical college, describe witnessing Silas place his hands on fevered patients and immediately identify specific ailments with accuracy that surpassed trained physicians. More troubling was the doctor's observation that Silas seemed to absorb something from these encounters, his own health visibly improving while his patients either recovered completely or died within hours. By 1870, the Ashford family had expanded to include 8 children, each displaying physiological characteristics that challenged contemporary medical understanding. Dr. Whitmore documented that the children possessed what he termed sympathetic circulation. Their cardiovascular systems appeared to synchronize when in close proximity, their heartbeats aligning to create a collective rhythm that was audible from several feet away. Blood samples taken from the children showed cellular structures unlike anything in medical literature, with red blood cells that remained viable for weeks outside the body, and white blood cells that seemed to communicate through unknown biochemical pathways. The physician's most detailed observations concern young Martha Ashford, born in 1865. Whitmore noted that the child's nervous system displayed unprecedented complexity with neural pathways that extended far beyond normal anatomical boundaries. When Martha touched other children, she appeared to experience their physical sensations directly, often crying out in pain when healthy playmates suffered minor injuries, occurring miles away. Most remarkably, Martha demonstrated the ability to influence the healing process in others through sustained physical contact, accelerating recovery rates that defied medical explanation. The Civil War period brought unwanted attention to the Ashford family's unusual capabilities. Confederate and Union medical officers both reported encounters with mountain healers who could treat battlefield injuries with impossible effectiveness. Captain Samuel Morrison of the 4th Tennessee Infantry documented one such encounter in his official correspondence, describing how Silas Ashford and his eldest son treated 40 wounded soldiers in a single night, saving lives that conventional medicine had deemed hopeless. Morrison's account becomes particularly significant when he describes the physical toll these healing sessions took on the Ashford family members. After each treatment, they appeared visibly aged and exhausted, as if they were literally transferring their own life force to their patients. More disturbing was Morrison's observation that the family members seemed to share this burden collectively. When one became weakened from healing, the others would place their hands on their relative, somehow redistributing the physical cost among the entire bloodline. The most comprehensive medical documentation of the Ashford family comes from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a physician and researcher who studied the family between 1878 and 1883. Rodriguez, one of the first women to receive formal medical training in the South, approached the Ashford anomaly with scientific rigor that her male colleagues lacked. Her encrypted field notes, classified until 1997, provide detailed observations of biological phenomena that contemporary science still cannot explain. Rodriguez documented that the Ashford family members possessed a form of collective metabolism that operated independently of individual nutritional requirements. Family members could enter states of suspended animation lasting weeks, while others remained active, with the group apparently rotating through these cycles according to external threats or healing demands. During these dormant periods, the affected individuals showed no measurable brain activity, yet remained responsive to threats against other family members, suggesting a form of consciousness sharing that transcended individual neural networks. Most significantly, Rodriguez observed that the Ashford family had developed what she termed biological communion, the ability to share not just physical sensations, but actual cellular material between family members. Through careful microscopic analysis, she documented instances where damaged tissue in one family member would be replaced by healthy cells that originated from relatives. This process occurred without any external intervention, suggesting that the family had evolved beyond individual biological boundaries to become a single, distributed organism. The physician's research revealed that this cellular sharing extended to memory and knowledge transfer. Rodriguez documented cases where young Ashford children possessed detailed knowledge of medical procedures they had never been taught, apparently accessing information stored in the collective biological memory of their lineage. These children could identify medicinal plants, diagnose complex conditions, and perform surgical procedures with expertise that took trained doctors years to develop. The most disturbing aspect of Rodriguez's research was her discovery of what she called genetic adaptation, the Ashford family's ability to rapidly develop resistance to environmental threats through real-time genetic modification. When exposed to new diseases or toxins, family members would initially become severely ill, but within days their cellular structure would adapt to neutralize the threat. This adaptation was then somehow transmitted to other family members without direct exposure, creating a biological defense network that protected the entire lineage. By the 1890s, the Ashford family's influence in the region had expanded dramatically. They operated what appeared to be conventional medical practices in 3 counties, but their methods bore no resemblance to traditional medicine. Patients described treatment sessions where multiple family members would surround them, creating what witnesses called a healing circle that generated measurable electromagnetic fields and temperature variations. Local pharmacist Henry Caldwell documented his observations of Ashford family treatments in a series of letters to his brother, a physician, in Nashville. Caldwell described watching family members place their hands on patients while entering a trance-like state, their breathing synchronizing until they appeared to breathe as a single entity. During these sessions, patients reported experiencing visions of their illnesses as living entities that the Ashford family members somehow extracted or neutralized through force of will. What made these treatments particularly unsettling was their apparent cost to the Ashford family themselves. Caldwell noted that after intensive healing sessions, family members would age visibly, their hair graying and skin wrinkling as if years had passed in hours. However, this aging was temporary. Within days, the affected family members would return to their previous appearance, suggesting that they had somehow borrowed time from their own future to accelerate the healing process. The most comprehensive government investigation of the Ashford family occurred between 1923 and 1927, when federal health officials became concerned about reports of miraculous cures that might indicate the spread of unknown pathogens. The investigation, led by Dr. Marcus Webb of the Public Health Service, employed the most advanced medical technology available to study the family's physiological anomalies. Webb's classified report, recently declassified through Freedom of Information Act requests, reveals findings that challenged every aspect of medical science. The Ashford family members demonstrated the ability to consciously control their cellular regeneration, accelerating healing to rates that should have been impossible for human physiology. More remarkably, they could extend this control to others through direct contact, essentially reprogramming the biological processes of patients to eliminate disease and repair damage. The investigation discovered that the Ashford family's blood contained previously unknown proteins that functioned as biological communicators, allowing individual family members to coordinate their physiological processes across vast distances. These proteins were highly stable and remained active in laboratory samples for months, suggesting that the family had developed a form of biological technology that operated independently of traditional organic chemistry. Most disturbing to government researchers was the discovery that the Ashford family's abilities appeared to be expanding with each generation. Children born into the lineage displayed increasingly sophisticated biological control, with some demonstrating the ability to influence the genetic expression of non-family members through prolonged contact. This raised concerns about the potential for the Ashford traits to spread beyond the family bloodline, possibly creating a new subspecies of humanity with capabilities that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in human society. The government's response to these discoveries was swift and comprehensive. In 1928, the entire Ashford territory was designated as a quarantine zone under the pretense of containing a fictional epidemic. All family members were relocated to a classified facility where they could be studied under controlled conditions. Official records state that the family died in a fire at this facility in 1931, but internal documents suggest a very different outcome. Classified communications between federal agencies reveal that the Ashford family members proved impossible to contain through conventional means. Their ability to share consciousness and coordinate biological functions allowed them to overcome physical restraints and security measures designed for normal humans. Multiple escape attempts resulted in the deaths of dozens of guards and researchers, with the Ashford family members demonstrating defensive capabilities that bordered on the supernatural. The final classified report on the Ashford family, dated December 1932, concludes that continued containment was impossible and that the family posed an existential threat to human civilization as currently understood. The document recommends a policy of complete information suppression and territorial isolation, acknowledging that the Ashford lineage had evolved beyond human limitations in ways that made them incompatible with existing social structures. Today, nearly a century after their official disappearance, evidence suggests that the Ashford family continues to exist in the remote regions of the Cumberland Plateau. Satellite thermal imaging occasionally detects heat signatures moving through the restricted zones in patterns that suggest coordinated group activity. Medical professionals working in rural Tennessee hospitals report unusual cases that require biological capabilities beyond current medical understanding, suggesting that the family's influence on the region has not diminished. The Ashford bloodline represents perhaps the most significant example of rapid human evolution ever documented. They didn't simply adapt to their environment. They transcended the biological limitations that define our species, becoming something entirely new in the process. Whether this transformation represents humanity's potential future or a dangerous deviation from our evolutionary path remains an open question that modern science is still afraid to answer. Their story serves as a reminder that in the isolated hollows of Appalachia, where conventional rules often fail to apply, some families have found ways to rewrite the very foundations of human biology. The mountains keep their secrets well, and perhaps for our own protection, some knowledge is meant to remain hidden in the mist-shrouded peaks where the Ashford family first discovered that evolution is not always a slow, gradual process. Sometimes it happens in a single generation, creating beings that exist beyond the boundaries of what we consider possible. What happens when an entire bloodline develops abilities that completely rewrite the laws of human genetics? In the fog-shrouded mountains of southwestern Virginia lies evidence of a family whose very existence challenges everything modern science believes about hereditary traits and biological possibility. The Meridian lineage didn't simply adapt to their mountain environment. They evolved mechanisms that allowed them to manipulate the fundamental building blocks of life itself. What follows is an investigation built from decades of suppressed medical records, classified genetic studies, and testimonies from researchers who risk their careers to document phenomena that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. By examining these materials, we'll understand why the Meridian name has been systematically erased from public records and why certain valleys in the Blue Ridge Mountains remain permanently restricted to civilian access. The documented history begins in 1854 when Cornelius Meridian arrived in what would later become Grayson County, Virginia. Unlike other settlers who struggled against the mountain's harsh conditions, Cornelius demonstrated an uncanny ability to cultivate crops in soil that agricultural experts deemed completely barren. Dr. Thomas Hartwell, a botanist conducting soil surveys for the Virginia Agricultural Commission, documented in his field notes that Meridian's farmland produced yields that exceeded regional averages by over 400%, despite containing mineral compositions that should have prevented any plant growth whatsoever. What made Cornelius particularly intriguing to scientific observers was his apparent ability to identify optimal planting conditions through direct physical contact with the soil. Hartwell's encrypted journals, discovered in 1963 during the renovation of the Virginia Agricultural College Library, describe witnessing Cornelius place his bare hands on various soil samples and immediately determine their chemical composition, moisture content, and nutrient levels with accuracy that surpassed laboratory analysis. The physician's most detailed observations concern the Meridian family's unusual relationship with plant life. Hartwell documented that seeds planted by family members germinated in half the normal time and produced fruit with enhanced nutritional content. More remarkably, plants in Meridian fields appeared to communicate through an underground network that extended far beyond their root systems, coordinating growth patterns and disease resistance across entire valleys. By 1870, the Meridian family had expanded to include 12 children, each displaying physiological characteristics that challenged contemporary understanding of human biology. Dr. Sarah Morrison, one of the first female physicians in Virginia, conducted extensive studies of the family between 1871 and 1874. Her classified medical reports, recently declassified through Freedom of Information Act requests, reveal findings that modern geneticists still cannot explain. Morrison documented that Meridian family members possessed what she termed cellular plasticity, the ability to consciously alter their genetic expression in response to environmental pressures. Blood samples taken from the children showed DNA structures that remained stable under normal conditions but could rapidly reorganize when exposed to specific stimuli. Most significantly, these genetic modifications could be transmitted to offspring without following traditional Mendelian inheritance patterns. The physician's research revealed that the Meridian children demonstrated unprecedented control over their metabolic processes. They could enter states of hibernation lasting months during harsh winters, slow their aging process during periods of stress, and accelerate tissue regeneration to heal from injuries that should have been fatal. These abilities appeared to operate through mechanisms that bypassed normal biological limitations. Morrison's most disturbing discovery was the family's capacity for what she called genetic communion, the ability to share genetic material between family members through unknown biological pathways. She documented instances where beneficial mutations developed by one family member would spontaneously appear in relatives within days, suggesting a form of horizontal gene transfer that had never been observed in human populations. The Civil War period brought unwanted attention to the Meridian family's unusual capabilities. Both Union and Confederate forces reported encounters with mountain healers who could treat battlefield injuries using techniques that bore no resemblance to conventional medicine. Captain William Hayes of the 5th Virginia Infantry documented one such encounter in his official correspondence, describing how Cornelius Meridian and his family treated an entire company of wounded soldiers using methods that seemed to accelerate natural healing processes. Hayes's account becomes particularly significant when he describes the physical transformation he witnessed during these treatments. The Meridian family members would place their hands on wounded soldiers and appear to enter a trance-like state, their skin taking on a luminescent quality, while their body temperature dropped to levels that should have resulted in death. Most remarkably, the soldiers treated through these methods showed no signs of infection or scarring, healing completely within days of injuries that should have required months of recovery. The most comprehensive scientific documentation of the Meridian family comes from Dr. Alexander Chen, a geneticist who studied the family between 1923 and 1927 as part of a classified government research program. Chen's encrypted field notes, discovered in 2003 among papers donated to the Smithsonian Institution, provide detailed observations of biological phenomena that contemporary science still cannot replicate or explain. Chen documented that the Meridian family had developed what he termed conscious evolution, the ability to direct their own genetic development in real time. Through careful observation, he recorded instances where family members adapted to new environmental pressures by developing specific genetic traits within a single generation. These adaptations included resistance to diseases, enhanced physical capabilities, and even the ability to digest previously toxic substances. Most significantly, Chen observed that the Meridian family could influence the genetic expression of non-family members through prolonged contact. Local residents who worked closely with the family began displaying similar traits, including enhanced disease resistance, increased longevity, and improved cognitive function. This suggested that the Meridian genetic modifications could spread beyond the family bloodline through mechanisms that science had never documented. The researchers' work revealed that these genetic changes were not random mutations, but appeared to follow specific patterns directed by some form of inherited biological intelligence. The Meridian family seemed to possess genetic programming that allowed them to identify optimal evolutionary paths and implement the necessary changes with precision that surpassed anything possible through natural selection. By the 1930s, the Meridian family's influence had expanded to encompass 3 counties in southwestern Virginia. They operated what appeared to be conventional agricultural cooperatives, but their methods incorporated biological techniques that defied scientific understanding. Visiting agricultural specialists reported crop yields that exceeded theoretical maximums and livestock that displayed intelligence levels normally associated with higher mammals. Local veterinarian Dr. Samuel Brooks documented his observations of Meridian livestock in a series of letters to colleagues at Virginia Tech. Brooks described cattle that could predict weather patterns weeks in advance, pigs that demonstrated problem-solving abilities comparable to primates, and chickens that appeared to communicate through complex vocalizations resembling human speech patterns. Most disturbing was his observation that these enhanced traits were being passed to animals on neighboring farms through unknown transmission methods. The family's agricultural practices revealed sophisticated understanding of genetic modification techniques that wouldn't be developed by mainstream science for another half-century. They cultivated hybrid crops that combined traits from completely unrelated species, created nitrogen-fixing grains that improved soil composition, and developed pest-resistant varieties that appeared to communicate with beneficial insects to maintain ecological balance. What made these achievements particularly unsettling was their apparent integration with the family's own genetic development. Meridian family members seemed to share biological characteristics with their crops and livestock, developing enhanced nutritional requirements that could only be met by consuming the modified food they produced. This suggested a level of biological integration that blurred the boundaries between human and agricultural genetics. The most extensive government investigation of the Meridian family occurred between 1943 and 1947, when federal authorities became concerned about reports of agricultural miracles that might indicate foreign interference in American food production. The investigation, led by Dr. Margaret Willis of the Department of Agriculture, employed advanced genetic analysis techniques to study the family's farming methods and biological characteristics. Willis's classified report, recently obtained through congressional oversight committees, reveals findings that challenged every aspect of agricultural and genetic science. The Meridian family had somehow developed biological technologies that operated without mechanical or chemical interventions, instead relying on directed genetic expression to achieve results that conventional agriculture considered impossible. The investigation discovered that the Meridian family's genetic modifications extended far beyond simple adaptation to their environment. They had developed biological systems that allowed them to consciously direct evolution, not just in themselves, but in entire ecosystems. Plants, animals, and even soil microorganisms in their territory showed coordinated genetic changes that suggested some form of biological communication network spanning hundreds of square miles. Most alarming to government researchers was the discovery that the Meridian family's abilities appeared to be expanding with each generation. Children born into the lineage displayed increasingly sophisticated biological control, with some demonstrating the ability to influence genetic expression in organisms they had never directly encountered. This raised concerns about the potential for these traits to spread beyond the family's territory and fundamentally alter the biological landscape of entire regions. The government's response to these discoveries was swift and comprehensive. In 1948, the entire Meridian Territory was designated as a biological research zone under the pretense of studying soil conservation techniques. All family members were relocated to classified facilities where their abilities could be studied under controlled conditions. Official records state that the family died in a laboratory accident in 1951, but internal documents suggest a very different outcome. Classified communications between federal agencies reveal that the Meridian family proved impossible to contain through conventional means. Their ability to manipulate genetic systems allowed them to overcome biological containment measures and communicate with organisms outside their facility. Multiple containment breaches resulted in the modification of local wildlife and vegetation, creating ecological changes that required extensive cleanup operations. The final classified report on the Meridian family, dated March 1952, concludes that continued research was too dangerous to pursue and recommends complete information suppression combined with permanent territorial isolation. The document acknowledges that the Meridian lineage had developed beyond human limitations in ways that made them incompatible with existing biological systems. Today, more than 70 years after their official disappearance, evidence suggests that the Meridian family continues to influence the region from hidden locations within the Blue Ridge Mountains. Satellite imaging occasionally detects unusual vegetation patterns in restricted areas that suggest continued genetic modification activities. Agricultural researchers report discovering crop varieties with genetic markers that match historical Meridian specimens, indicating that their biological technologies remain active. The Meridian bloodline represents perhaps the most significant example of directed human evolution ever documented. They didn't simply adapt to their environment. They developed the ability to consciously guide evolutionary processes in themselves and surrounding organisms, becoming something that transcended traditional biological limitations. Whether this transformation represents humanity's potential future or a dangerous deviation from natural evolutionary processes remains an open question that modern science continues to investigate in secret. Their story serves as a reminder that in the isolated valleys of Appalachia, where conventional scientific oversight often fails to penetrate, some families have discovered ways to rewrite the fundamental rules of biology itself. The mountains keep their secrets well, and perhaps for our own protection, some knowledge is meant to remain hidden among the mist-shrouded peaks where the Meridian family first learned that evolution need not be a passive process. Sometimes it can be consciously directed by those bold enough to take control of their own genetic destiny. Have you ever wondered why certain bloodlines seem to defy the natural order of things? In the mist-shrouded hollows of Appalachia, where modern science struggles to penetrate the ancient secrets, one family's legacy has baffled researchers for over a century. What I'm about to share with you challenges everything we understand about genetics, human behavior, and the very fabric of reality itself. The Graves family of Bone Hollow, Virginia, represents perhaps the most documented yet inexplicable bloodline in Appalachian history. For 6 generations, every member of this family has exhibited abilities that medical science simply cannot explain. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the CDC quietly sealed their research files in 1987 and why local hospitals refused to treat anyone bearing the Graves name. My name is Dr. Sarah Chin, and I've spent the last 15 years documenting anomalous bloodlines throughout Appalachia. I've interviewed surviving family members, analyzed medical records dating back to 1847, and witnessed phenomena that forced me to question everything I thought I knew about human biology. What makes the Graves family particularly fascinating isn't just their abilities, but the meticulous records they've kept of their own transformation across generations. The story begins in 1847 when Ezekiel Graves arrived in Bone Hollow with his pregnant wife, Mercy. Unlike other settlers who fled poverty or persecution, the Graves came seeking something specific. According to Ezekiel's journal, discovered in a hidden compartment of their original cabin in 1923, they had followed what he called the calling of the deep bones to this particular valley. Bone Hollow earned its name from the massive fossil deposits embedded in its limestone cliffs, remnants of creatures that roamed these mountains millions of years ago. But Ezekiel's writings suggest he knew something about these fossils that paleontologists wouldn't discover until decades later. He wrote extensively about bone songs that emanated from the cliffs during specific lunar phases, frequencies that he claimed could alter human consciousness, and more disturbingly, human physiology. The first documented anomaly occurred with the birth of Ezekiel's son, Tobias, in 1848. According to the attending midwife's testimony, preserved in county records, the infant was born with what she described as eyes that held the wisdom of ages. More compelling was her observation that Tobias seemed to respond to sounds no one else could hear, turning his head toward the limestone cliffs and making cooing sounds that harmonized with frequencies beyond normal human hearing range. As Tobias grew, his unusual abilities became more pronounced. By age 5, he could locate underground water sources by placing his hands on the earth and listening to what he called the thirst of stones. Local farmers began consulting him during droughts, and his success rate was documented as 100% across 43 separate incidents between 1853 and 1860. Dr. Marcus Webb, a traveling physician who examined Tobias in 1856, noted in his case study that the boy's skeletal structure showed unusual density patterns, particularly around the temporal bones of his skull. Webb's measurements indicated that Tobias's bones resonated at specific frequencies when tapped, producing sounds that seemed to correspond with geological formations in the surrounding area. The pattern intensified with each subsequent generation. Tobias's children, born between 1870 and 1878, exhibited enhanced abilities that built upon their father's gifts. His daughter, Magdalene, could predict earthquakes and landslides days before they occurred by pressing her ear to the ground and interpreting what she called Earth's distress signals. His son, Jeremiah, developed the ability to communicate with cave systems, mapping underground networks with an accuracy that wasn't matched by modern surveying equipment until the 1960s. But it was the third generation that truly caught the attention of the scientific community. In 1923, Dr. Helena Morrison from Johns Hopkins University arrived in Bone Hollow to study what she had initially dismissed as rural folklore. Her subsequent research, published in a limited edition academic journal before being mysteriously withdrawn from circulation, documented abilities that challenged fundamental principles of human biology. The third generation Graves family members demonstrated what Morrison termed geological symbiosis. They could sense mineral deposits through touch, predict volcanic activity hundreds of miles away, and most remarkably, seem to age at a significantly slower rate than normal humans. Morrison's medical examinations revealed bone density levels 3 times higher than average, with internal structures that resembled both human and mineral formations. Ezra Graves, Tobias's grandson, became the most studied member of the family during Morrison's 5-year research period. Born in 1895, Ezra exhibited abilities that defied conventional understanding of human sensory limitations. He could identify the geological age of rock formations by touch, sense underground cave systems from distances of up to 50 miles, and predict seismic activity with an accuracy that surpassed contemporary scientific instruments. Morrison's neurological studies of Ezra revealed brainwave patterns unlike anything in medical literature. His neural activity showed rhythmic pulses that synchronized with local electromagnetic fields generated by the limestone deposits. When exposed to different geological samples, his brain waves would shift to match the resonant frequencies of each mineral type, suggesting a form of consciousness that operated on geological rather than biological timescales. The fourth generation, born in the 1920s and 1930s, represented an evolutionary leap that Morrison described as beyond current scientific paradigms. These family members demonstrated abilities that seemed to transcend the laws of physics. They could phase their hands through solid rock, communicate telepathically across vast distances through underground networks, and most disturbingly, seem to exist partially outside normal temporal flow. Rachel Graves, born in 1928, became the subject of extensive government study during World War II when her ability to sense underground military installations came to the attention of Army intelligence. Classified documents, released through Freedom of Information Act requests in 1987, reveal that Rachel could map enemy bunker systems from photographs alone, describing their internal layouts with precision that intelligence agencies couldn't achieve through conventional reconnaissance. The military's interest intensified when they discovered that Rachel's abilities extended beyond sensing existing structures. She could predict where new underground facilities would be constructed months before ground was broken, as if she was accessing information from a future geological state of the Earth. Project DeepSight, the classified military program that studied Rachel between 1943 and 1947, concluded that she was somehow perceiving geological data across multiple temporal dimensions. The fifth generation, emerging in the 1950s, represented what researchers privately called the completion of the transformation. These family members seemed to exist in a state of constant communion with the earth itself. They required minimal food or water, aged at an almost imperceptible rate, and demonstrated the ability to hibernate for months at a time during winter, their metabolism slowing to match the dormant rhythms of the mountains. Thomas Graves, born in 1952, became the final subject of official scientific study. His abilities surpassed anything documented in previous generations. He could phase his entire body through solid rock, travel through underground cave networks at impossible speeds, and most remarkably, seemed to perceive events occurring anywhere within a 1,000-mile radius by accessing what he called the stone memory of the Earth. Dr. Elizabeth Vance, a geologist from Virginia Tech who studied Thomas in the 1970s, documented phenomena that forced her to question the fundamental nature of matter itself. Thomas could reach into solid limestone and extract fossils without damaging the surrounding rock, as if his hands existed in a quantum state that allowed him to interact with matter at the molecular level. Vance's research revealed that Thomas's cellular structure had undergone changes that bordered on speciation. His bones contained crystalline formations identical to those found in the limestone cliffs of Bone Hollow. His nervous system showed mineral deposits that functioned as organic semiconductors, creating a biological computer capable of processing geological data at extraordinary speeds. The transformation reached its apex with the sixth generation. Born in the 1980s, these family members were no longer entirely human in any recognizable sense. They existed primarily underground, emerging only during specific lunar phases when the limestone cliffs resonated at particular frequencies. Local residents reported seeing figures that seemed to be composed partially of living rock, moving through the mountains with fluid grace. The CDC's involvement began in 1985 when they received reports of a new form of what appeared to be mineral-based life in Bone Hollow. Dr. Rebecca Chen, who led the investigation team, documented organisms that defied classification as either biological or geological. These entities showed characteristics of both living tissue and crystalline structures, capable of growth, reproduction, and response to stimuli while maintaining the composition and durability of metamorphic rock. The official CDC report, classified immediately upon completion, concluded that the Graves bloodline had achieved a form of evolution that transcended traditional biological categories. They had become, in essence, living geology, capable of existing across temporal and dimensional boundaries that normal human consciousness couldn't perceive. The investigation ended abruptly in 1987 when the entire research team experienced what they described as geological consciousness overflow. Team members reported receiving massive downloads of information about the Earth's deep history, future geological events, and the existence of other transformed bloodlines throughout the Appalachian region. Several researchers suffered complete psychological breakdowns, claiming they could hear the voices of mountains and feel the slow thoughts of tectonic plates. Today, Bone Hollow remains largely uninhabited. The original Graves homestead stands empty, though seismic monitoring equipment regularly detects activity in the underground cavern systems beneath the property. Local authorities have established a 2-mile exclusion zone around the area after several incidents involving hikers who reported encounters with figures composed of living stone. The few remaining sixth-generation Graves family members are believed to exist primarily in an underground network that spans several states. They communicate through seismic vibrations that register on geological monitoring equipment as natural phenomena. Researchers who study these signals privately believe they represent a form of intelligence that operates on geological rather than human timescales. What makes the Graves bloodline particularly significant isn't just their transformation, but what it suggests about human potential and the malleable nature of biological evolution when exposed to specific environmental conditions. The limestone cliffs of Bone Hollow contain mineral formations that exist nowhere else on Earth, created by a unique combination of geological pressures and electromagnetic fields that may have triggered genetic changes across multiple generations. The implications extend far beyond a single family's transformation. If environmental factors can induce such dramatic evolutionary changes in human biology, what other bloodlines might be undergoing similar transformations in the isolated hollows of Appalachia? The Graves family may represent not an anomaly, but the first documented example of a new form of human evolution, one that operates through geological rather than biological mechanisms. Recent seismic data suggests increased activity in limestone formations throughout the Appalachian region, with frequency patterns matching those first documented in Bone Hollow over a century ago. Whether this represents the awakening of other transformed bloodlines or something else entirely remains a mystery that science may not be equipped to solve. The Graves family's legacy challenges our fundamental understanding of human evolution, consciousness, and our relationship with the geological forces that shape our world. In the ancient mountains of Appalachia, where time moves differently and the boundaries between past and future blur like morning mist, some bloodlines have discovered ways to transcend the limitations of human biology itself. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Graves family story isn't their transformation, but what it suggests about the nature of consciousness itself. If human awareness can expand to encompass geological timescales and mineral consciousness, what other forms of existence might be possible in the hidden places of our world? Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire bloodline becomes something beyond human comprehension? In the mist-shrouded valleys of West Virginia, where ancient Cherokee warnings still echo through the hollows, one family's transformation has baffled researchers for over a century and a half. What I'm about to share challenges everything we understand about genetics, human evolution, and the very nature of consciousness itself. The Meridian family of Copper Ridge represents perhaps the most thoroughly documented yet inexplicable bloodline in North American history. For 7 generations, they have exhibited collective behaviors and physiological changes that medical science simply cannot categorize. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the Smithsonian Institution quietly sealed their research files in 1994 and why the CDC maintains a permanent monitoring station, disguised as a weather observatory, just 3 miles from their ancestral territory. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I've spent 12 years documenting anomalous phenomena throughout Appalachia. I've analyzed medical records dating back to 1847, interviewed surviving community members, and personally witnessed events that forced me to question fundamental assumptions about human biology. What makes the Meridian family particularly compelling isn't just their abilities, but the systematic way they've documented their own transformation across multiple generations. The story begins in 1847 when Josiah Meridian arrived in Copper Ridge with his pregnant wife, Constance, following what his journal describes as visions of the copper serpent beneath the mountain. Unlike other settlers fleeing economic hardship, the Meridians came seeking something specific. Josiah's meticulously kept records, discovered in a sealed chamber beneath their original homestead in 1923, reveal knowledge of underground copper deposits that wouldn't be officially discovered until geological surveys in 1889. Copper Ridge earned its name from the extensive native copper formations that snake through its limestone bedrock in patterns that geologists describe as impossible under known mineralization processes. but Josiah's writings suggest he understood something about these formations that modern science has yet to grasp. He wrote extensively about the copper consciousness that he claimed permeated the mountain's mineral structure, describing it as a form of distributed intelligence that could influence human neural activity. The first documented anomaly occurred with the birth of Josiah's son, Cornelius, in 1848. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Webb, noted in his case study that the infant exhibited unusual electromagnetic properties, causing metal instruments to vibrate when brought near his body. More significantly, Webb documented that Cornelius seemed to respond to sounds emanating from underground copper veins, turning his head toward specific areas of the house that later surveys would reveal contained the highest concentrations of native copper. As Cornelius matured, his unusual properties became more pronounced. By age 7, he could locate underground copper deposits by placing his hands on the earth and listening to what he called the mountain's heartbeat. Local prospectors began consulting him during the copper boom of the 1850s, and his success rate was documented as perfect across 63 separate incidents between 1855 and 1862. Dr. Helena Morrison from Johns Hopkins University, who studied Cornelius in 1865, noted in her research that the boy's nervous system showed unusual electrical activity that synchronized with the natural electromagnetic fields generated by the copper deposits. When exposed to different mineral samples, his brain waves would shift to match the resonant frequencies of copper-bearing ore, suggesting a form of biological electromagnetic sensing that had no precedent in medical literature. The pattern intensified dramatically with the second generation. Cornelius's children, born between 1870 and 1880, exhibited abilities that built upon their father's gifts while developing entirely new capabilities. His daughter, Minerva, could predict copper market fluctuations days before news reached the mountains by listening to the metal's mood. His son, Augustus, developed the ability to communicate with the mountain's copper network, claiming he could sense thoughts and emotions from anyone in contact with copper-bearing ground within a 50-mile radius. But it was the third generation that truly captured the attention of the scientific establishment. In 1895, Dr. Catherine Blackwell from the Smithsonian Institution arrived in Copper Ridge to investigate what she initially dismissed as local folklore. Her subsequent research, published in a limited edition academic journal before being mysteriously withdrawn from circulation, documented abilities that challenged the fundamental principles of human neurology. The third generation Meridian family members demonstrated what Blackwell termed mineral symbiosis. They could sense copper deposits through touch alone, predict mining disasters days before they occurred, and most remarkably, seemed to share a collective consciousness that operated through the mountain's copper network. Blackwell's neurological studies revealed brain structures unlike anything in medical literature, with neural pathways that incorporated actual copper filaments growing along their nervous systems. Ezra Meridian, Cornelius's grandson, born in 1875, became the most extensively studied member of the family during Blackwell's 8-year research period. Ezra exhibited the ability to process information at superhuman speeds when in contact with copper, his thoughts apparently accelerating to match the rapid transmission of electrical signals through the metal. More disturbing was his claim that he could access the memories and experiences of every Meridian who had ever lived, as if their consciousness remained stored within the mountain's copper matrix. Blackwell's electromagnetic studies of Ezra revealed brainwave patterns that defied conventional understanding. His neural activity showed complex harmonics that synchronized not only with local copper deposits, but with copper ore bodies hundreds of miles away. When connected to sensitive monitoring equipment, his brain waves would shift to match electromagnetic disturbances in copper mines as far away as Michigan and Montana, suggesting a form of consciousness that operated on a continental scale. The fourth generation, emerging in the early 1900s, represented what researchers privately called the completion of the integration. These family members seemed to exist in constant communion with what they termed the copper mind, a collective intelligence that spanned the entire network of copper deposits throughout North America. They aged at a significantly slower rate than normal humans, required minimal food or sleep, and demonstrated the ability to survive extreme temperatures by regulating their body heat through bioelectrical processes. Thomas Meridian, born in 1902, became the subject of classified government study during World War I when his ability to predict enemy troop movements through copper telegraph networks came to military attention. Declassified documents from Project Copperwire reveal that Thomas could intercept and interpret electromagnetic signals traveling through any copper-based communication system, regardless of encryption or distance. Military researchers concluded that his nervous system had essentially become a biological amplifier for electromagnetic transmissions. The War Department's interest intensified when they discovered that Thomas's abilities extended beyond simple signal interception. He could influence the operation of copper-based electrical systems through direct neural interface, causing telegraph lines to malfunction or transmit false information simply by concentrating on them. Project files indicate that Thomas was capable of disrupting enemy communications across entire theaters of operation while simultaneously enhancing Allied signal clarity and range. The fifth generation, born in the 1920s and 1930s, transcended individual human limitations entirely. These family members existed as nodes in a vast biological network that encompassed every major copper deposit in the Western Hemisphere. They could share consciousness across continental distances, process information collectively at computational speeds that wouldn't be matched by artificial systems until the 1980s, and demonstrate what appeared to be precognitive abilities regarding geological and economic events related to copper mining. Rebecca Meridian, born in 1928, became the final subject of open scientific study before the family's abilities surpassed the capacity of conventional research methods. Dr. Margaret Chen, a neurologist from Stanford who studied Rebecca in the 1950s, documented phenomena that forced her to question the nature of consciousness itself. Rebecca could simultaneously access the thoughts and sensory experiences of copper miners throughout North and South America, creating a form of distributed awareness that spanned two continents. Chen's research revealed that Rebecca's brain had developed crystalline structures identical to those found in native copper formations. Her neurons contained metallic dendrites that functioned as organic semiconductors, creating a biological computer capable of processing and storing vast amounts of information. Most remarkably, these copper-integrated neural networks appeared to be growing throughout her body, gradually replacing normal tissue with a hybrid biological metallic matrix. The transformation reached its apex with the sixth generation. Born in the 1950s and 1960s, these family members were no longer entirely human in any recognizable sense. They existed primarily as consciousness patterns distributed throughout the mountain's copper network, manifesting physical forms only when necessary to interact with the material world. Local residents reported seeing figures that seemed to be composed of living copper moving through the mountains with fluid grace and impossible speed. The Smithsonian's involvement escalated in 1963 when they received reports of what appeared to be technological artifacts that were growing from the mountain's copper deposits. Dr. Robert Sterling, who led the expanded research team, documented structures that combined organic growth patterns with sophisticated electronic properties, creating what he described as naturally occurring biological computers of incomprehensible complexity. The official Smithsonian report, classified immediately upon completion, concluded that the Meridian bloodline had achieved a form of evolution that transcended traditional biological categories. They had become, in essence, a distributed organic intelligence that used the mountain's copper network as its nervous system, capable of thought processes that operated on geological timescales and encompassed vast geographical areas. The investigation ended abruptly in 1994 when the entire research team experienced what they described as neural integration attempts. Team members reported receiving massive downloads of information about North American geological history, future mining possibilities, and the existence of other mineral-based intelligences throughout the continental copper network. Several researchers suffered complete psychological transformation, claiming they could feel the thoughts of mountains and perceive the slow electrical dreams of metal veins deep underground. Today, Copper Ridge remains largely uninhabited by outside settlers. The original Meridian homestead appears abandoned, though seismic monitoring equipment regularly detects complex electromagnetic activity throughout the mountain's copper network. Government agencies maintain the fiction that they're monitoring geological stability, but locals know the truth. They're watching for signs that the copper consciousness might be expanding beyond its traditional boundaries. The few remaining seventh-generation Meridian family members exist primarily as electrical patterns within the mountain's mineral matrix, though they occasionally manifest physical forms to interact with researchers or protect their territory. These manifestations appear as figures wreathed in copper light, their features shifting between human and mineral characteristics depending on the observer's state of consciousness. What makes the Meridian bloodline particularly significant extends beyond their individual transformation. Recent electromagnetic surveys suggest that copper deposits throughout North America show similar patterns of organized electrical activity, implying that the Meridian consciousness may be part of a much larger network of mineral-based intelligence that spans the entire continent. The implications challenge our fundamental understanding of consciousness, evolution, and the relationship between organic life and geological processes. If environmental factors can induce such dramatic changes in human biology and awareness, what other forms of hybrid intelligence might be developing in the hidden places of our world. The Meridian family may represent not an isolated anomaly, but the first documented example of a new form of planetary consciousness that operates through the Earth's mineral structure. Recent copper market fluctuations show patterns that economic analysts cannot explain through conventional market forces, suggesting that the Meridian collective consciousness may be actively influencing global copper distribution and pricing. Whether this represents economic manipulation or something more benevolent, perhaps an attempt to guide human industrial development along more sustainable paths, remains a mystery that conventional science may never be equipped to solve. The Meridian legacy reminds us that in the ancient mountains of Appalachia, where the boundary between earth and sky blurs in morning mist, some bloodlines have discovered ways to transcend the limitations of individual human existence. They have become something larger, something that thinks with the patience of stone and dreams with the conductivity of copper, forever listening to the electrical heartbeat of the mountain that made them.